what we have heard from both sides of this issue, Ed Pinto at the American Enterprise Institute and Danny Wiley from Freddie Mac, is an acknowledgement that an analysis of the data on waivers show.
He's describing and saying that artificial intelligence is much more like electricity than it is like the internet wave, in that it's going to be a horizontal enabler. It's going to be everywhere and in everything.
Episode 23 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, excited to be here with you today. We have sort of a variety of topics on the docket today. Look forward to talking to you. A little behind the scenes on the podcast here, Jeff. We have struggled with our audio. This is I think our listeners will have a really hard time believing this. We have not spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on our production so far here, but our audio has been something we've struggled with a bit. And I think both you and I were making the same mistake of just using the wrong mic. Is that what we concluded leading into this recording?
We may as well reveal our warts and all the ugly things. Yeah, I think that was the conclusion, although I can swear to you that I have looked and checked multiple times. And yeah, as we were checking this morning, it was trying to pull the audio from our cameras. So in fact, the irony, Mark, is we had somebody reach out very kindly and complimentary. Tim Anderson, super nice guy, got a great podcast that he does. So shout out to Tim, check him out. But he was talking about the high quality or like a positive level of like production quality that we have. And I think that he was maybe being more generous than we deserved under the circumstances.
Well, any compliment in that direction is aimed at our team, and Maggie being central to that. So thank you, Maggie, who is back there running the show. So yeah, I think this is a testament to perfection is the enemy of profit. Get out there and start doing something. My advice to any of you that are considering doing this, we have been far from perfect, but Jeff and I have been pretty excited about the direction of this so far, and hope to keep it going in 2025.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Crazy to be closing out the year. One other, just noteworthy thing, Mark, I do have confirmation that at least my wife is actually listening. She mentioned a call out that I did last week, or a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was. And I assume she was just being kind and saying that she actually listened. But I had a funny experience, man. I sent her a link to a Lex Friedman interview. I don't remember who it was, but just an interesting topic, interesting person. I thought she'd like it. And her feedback, she came back, she's like, "You sound better than him. Like, I don't know why people listen to him. They should listen to you." I was like, "Well, don't pay attention to like the fact that he's talking to world leaders and has a following of millions, because I'm kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum."
Yeah, Jeff, I think we were not really joking in the first couple of episodes that you and I's mothers, once we gained their listenership at about episode 4 or 5, we didn't have our wives yet. So maybe at least we've gotten one of them. We haven't gotten mine yet. But we'll keep efforting. And, I think the thing that I'm enjoying, and it's been a lot of fun here. I've been listening to podcasts, my whole professional career, about as soon as they got in, from way back in the day with like Dave Ramsey. I used to really enjoy listening to him. I listened to the talk radio guys well before that. And then really started to like the long form Joe Rogan stuff. And then that transformed into this kind of all in podcast. And so that's been kind of the areas that I've listened to a lot, but really appreciating the extended conversations that you don't find a lot out there. And we're finding our own way to do that on at least a couple of topics. We did that with Perea in kind of multiple episodes discussing it. And we've done that also most recently with the appraisal waivers. Really didn't set out to do it, but said, hey, there's probably some other perspectives we need to gain here. And I've been pleased with how that's gone. Which brings us, Jeff, I think is maybe, I don't know if it's a recap or just to touch on appraisal waivers and where you and I are with our evolution of thinking.
Yeah, I love that summary, Mark, because it's an effort, and I think reflects a little bit of the appraiser in both of us, to try to just research, find information, analyze and understand it, and then decide what do I do with that going forward. And of course, I've heard from people who, appraisers specifically, who say, like, there's risk with appraisal waivers. It's taking business, out of our book of business, which I'm trying to keep appraisers employed and happy and functioning. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to that, and don't even disagree. But I think our approach of let's understand it from multiple different perspectives, and then, as we assess and read what the market's doing, hopefully make informed decisions about how best to adapt. And we'll kind of come back to that topic, I think, a little bit later on. But I listened to an episode recently, as you highlighted some of the podcasts. There's one that was also on the topic of appraisal waivers. Phil Crawford with the Voice of Appraisal just put one out that was really interesting. He had an anecdote in his backyard, in his market. He's in the Cincinnati area, where it was just an interesting scenario. I appreciated the perspective that it brought, because, in a nutshell, what he had found is there was a home in a neighborhood that had sold well above everything else in that neighborhood. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the homes in that subdivision were selling in the high $300,000 price range, mid to upper 300s, I think. There was one home that sold with an appraisal waiver, no appraisal done, over 400,000. I don't remember the exact price. Of course, if you want the details, go check out his show. But the point I think that he was making, Mark, was that because there was no appraiser involved in that particular transaction, there was no third party or independent voice in that transaction saying, hey, this thing is probably under contract for more than everything else. It's probably selling above market. And then what's the downstream effects? Does that then become a comparable sell that then gets used by others? And did it really meet the definition of market value, where you had a knowledgeable and well-informed buyer, making an offer? So it was an interesting anecdote. I can't tell you, how often or not that sort of thing is happening. But it was interesting to hear that on the heels of our conversation with the last episode with Danny Wiley, and love your perspective on it.
Yeah, really, really interesting, Jeff. And I haven't had a chance to listen yet, but have a general concept. I only know Phil through attending a conference I think he was involved with, Appraisal Fest in San Antonio many years back. But liked his enthusiasm quite a bit. And I think this data interconnectivity in this data cancer concept that is there is really interesting, and I think it's sort of been under the microscope to an indirect degree, even in this appraisal bias stuff. I think, boy, has there been a lot of conversations over the last 2 years regarding this, and as people are looking at the average sell price, the average appraised value in different neighborhoods and different scenarios that are out there, you see how this is. And there, it kind of leads back often to a discussion about the sales comparison approach and what it does. A lot of the findings have, homes on this side of the tracks are different value than the other side of the tracks. And this all is the data interconnectivity. And one single sale, my goodness, if you buy a house, the last thing that you want is to see 20 appraisers over the next 6 months coming to take a picture of your house because you overpaid, right? Because that appraiser needs that sale to make the next 6 months of sale prices. And so I always take pride in having no one come to take a picture of my house after I buy it. But this does highlight that. And, I think it is a concern, not just with appraisal waivers, but it's I guess generally speaking, it is a concern when you have an inflated sale price that is unchecked one way or another. So I can see the problem. I think it is a very real problem that a single sale a single high sale has an exaggerated and order of magnitude effect on a marketplace.
Yeah, you bet, Mark. And appraisers that are doing their jobs, when you see an anomaly in the data, should be investigating. And that's what Phil was talking about having done, called the agent, to find out what was going on, discovered this kind of the circumstances of the sale. As an appraiser, you ought to then decide, should that be used in the analysis? Did it reflect the actual market or something that, maybe stands out? But, To the broader point, or maybe zooming out just a little bit, I recently had a conversation at a real estate sales office team where, they invite local appraisers to come and talk to them about valuation, related topics. And the topic came up, and it dawned on me as I was talking with them that appraisers have a very narrowly focused kind of point of focus within the real estate space. It's all around valuation specifically. And real estate agents, and especially the good ones that are wanting to represent their clients well, valuation is one piece that they do, but it's a very small piece of the whole of what they do. Because when you look at their education to get their license credential in the first place, valuation is a very small component of the overall, kind of core group of topics that they have to be well versed in, from representation to fiduciary duties. Practically they have to be good with, talking with people, facilitating transactions, coordinating a bunch of different, parties in a transaction. Valuation, just of necessity, isn't the primary focus, though they deal with pricing properties all the time, and then the good ones are good at it. But as I was talking with them, it dawned on me that appraisers are very focused on just that one aspect. And so as they had some questions about, well, how do you think about accounting for differences in age or condition or things like that, I was able to share some perspectives that they just hadn't really thought of because they don't dive nearly as deeply, as we do. They shared an anecdote of a home that was a listing they were trying to take, listed at like $4.3 million. Well, they wanted to list it about 3.5. They went out and found an appraiser to appraise it at 4.3, but they're saying in doing that, he was comparing it to brand new homes, and this was a 15 or 20-year-old home, and they didn't think that the appraiser was adequately accounting for some of those differences. And in this particular case, their intuition was probably better than what this homeowner found an appraiser to go tell him, which was unfortunate. But it highlighted that when these waivers happen and there's no third party looking at it, nobody that's trained specifically, in the valuation piece, you're open to the risk that there may not be a well-informed, decision made. Now, I don't know that just because there's a waiver, that means everything's automatically selling well above the purchase price. You know what I mean? But I hope that there's a role that appraisers can play in the market with or without waivers that bring value to a transaction in protecting a very significant investment decision that people are making.
So Jeff, we spent a long time talking about Perea, and I could envision a world where a lender or an appraisal management company that's managing a roster of appraisers, I might want to know if someone came. It's a new database field for the application of the appraiser. Did you come from Perea, or have you done live assignments, as a licensee yet? And this kind of occurs to me as we're talking here. There has never really been a need for a data field in an MLS, as an example, about, did an appraisal occur as part of this sale? Because almost always the answer is yes. But it may be such now that would be good information to have in an MLS field for an appraiser to quickly digest and understand what's happened in that process.
You bet. Or even for the listing agent looking to price and take a listing, or are they relying on data that was, maybe inflated? And I will just say, Mark, it's not that there have never been people that have overpaid or underpaid for properties in the market. I think this just opens it up to whenever there is the data field in most MLS systems that talk about the type of financing that was secured. Was it a cash offer? Was it owner finance? Was it conventional or like government funded or backed loans, FHA, VA? In this case, a conventional loan would, maybe have a waiver, maybe not. There's no way to decipher that. You hope that both for the agents and for the appraisers, when something stands out, that you're investigating a little more deeply and not necessarily just taking it at face value on, well, it sold for that and it's way higher than everything else. I don't know why, but I'm going to just rely on it equally as others. But to this point, there's no way to differentiate that. So I think you make a good point there.
Yeah. It's interesting. And, I hope, I maybe not, but I hope this is an edge case extreme example of difference. But it may not be, and I think there's danger in the possibility that it isn't. What we have heard from both sides of this issue, Ed Pinto at the American Enterprise Institute and Danny Wiley from Freddie Mac, is an acknowledgement that an analysis of the data on waivers show a value of the property or an assumed value of the property to be 1 to 2% lower when a waiver is used versus an appraisal. That's the data that we have seen from both sides of this issue, and that's in aggregate. And so I'd expect that's the case. And what I think our conversation so far and our curiosity is missing at this point is, how are the users of appraisal services reacting to that? Do they know that? Do they feel that in what they're doing? And so I hope that we can find, and for those of you listening, if you present relatively well and would like to talk about your experience, to have a loan officer, mortgage broker, or realtor come on and talk about how they view these waivers, and do you err towards bypassing the opportunity for a waiver because you know that inherently it's going to come in a little more conservative, or whatever the considerations are? I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, I love the various perspectives, and boy, I'm grateful to Ed and to Danny, for being willing to come on and share their perspectives. And I think the tone and the approach that we've taken here, Mark, is to try to investigate and come to understand what's going on out there and the various perspectives. But I'm grateful to those that have been willing to come on and share kind of candidly, what they perceive as the value and the risks or potential for, either abuse or just misutilization of the program as it evolves. And I do have in the back of my mind an option for another guest who may be able to shed some additional light there as well. But I think it's important to understand that the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are in the risk analysis, business. I mean, that's what they do to make money, is buying loans on the secondary market. And so what they need from an appraisal or from any sort of valuation analysis tool, I think sometimes the appraisers, we don't always, fully grasp or see the full picture there. And so our effort is to, try to fill in some of those blind spots with, better perspectives.
And I'm guilty of this, certainly in this ongoing conversation of, let us not forget that it was just 15 years ago that Fannie and Freddie were part of the U.S. a bailout, and getting over the country, getting over its skis in this. And so expansion of this got to come with a very healthy risk analysis. And I think we're seeing reports to suggest that that's happening. But more to come and more to see how this stuff plays out. And I probably would be better to be a little more skeptical than I am. And I'm learning from that. We'll get there. And so I think, Jeff, that this is just a latest example of the kind of adaptability and change that market participants in any market, specifically one that is regulated and operates under regulations so directly, that can change so quickly. You had mentioned on a few episodes back about the importance of adaptability. One of the, as it turns out, one of the powerhouses in our in at least around our industry, maybe not in appraisal, but in real estate generally, is United Wholesale Mortgage, who are now the largest lender in the country, and have really soared to that in a short period of time. And their CEO, Matt Ishbia, who may be most known for just buying the Phoenix Suns here recently, and I actually happened to see on his LinkedIn that they're selling $2 hot dogs. I'm all for that. But I often listen to a lot of quarterly earnings calls from builders and mortgage companies and beyond, just to understand how everybody's seeing this stuff. And it's been really notable, his perception. I think this came out, this conversation came as the realtor commission changes were sort of thrust upon the marketplace. And someone was asking him how he thought about it. And then again, this outlook reared its head when talking about this surprising Fed funds rate lowers, mortgage rates go higher. In each of these, an opportunity, change presents opportunity. So in the realtor commissions, it is, hey, look, yeah, I don't exactly know how this is going to play out, but it's going to mean change. And I think we're pretty good at adapting to change. And I think it will become an opportunity for us pretty quick. On the mortgage rate side, and I think this is really, really proven to bear, is, hey, mortgage rates stay high, fine. We'll go continue to gain market share. Mortgage rates go down, refis start kicking up, and then we get really busy here. And I think those two perspectives that he voiced on separate earning calls are really interesting because it is that growth mentality and taking on change as opportunity, and kind of the next topic we wanted to cover here.
Yeah, I love that setup and that perspective. And as a side note, Mark, Matt would be a fun guest to have on. So we'll see what we can do to extend an invite to him. But that's one of the things that I find with those that tend to work their way through change, disruption, hardship, whatever it is just this confidence that, hey, things are going to change, and I'm comfortable with that. I know I can thrive in that environment. It does harken back to this, this evolutionary concept of it's not the smartest or the strongest, but the most adaptable of a species that tends to survive or stand the test of time. And it sure feels like that's the case within business and within markets generally, is that, man, I'd love for things to be the way they've always been, the way that I know and I'm comfortable with them being, but that's just not reality, when I look around. And especially with I think the accelerating influence the technology is on across the board, and artificial intelligence, we're very early on in that wave coming forward. And I don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 or 10 years, for appraisers and real estate and beyond, but I do know it's going to look different than it does today. And this embracing kind of the uncertain or the unknowable as far as what change is going to bring resonates with me, a lot more than fighting it. Now, that's not to say that all change is virtuous and should be, equally embraced. That there, bad ideas do get perpetrated and, end up in problems. But I also think, resisting it just for the sake of not being willing to adapt is detrimental in the long run. And, it's the way that we do appraisals is going to differ from the way that we have done. I think the way that a lot of market participants even find homes and research data today looks a lot different than it did 5 or 10 years ago. My wife will, when she gets on a kick, will like scroll through homes or other things in the past. We're not doing that as much in the moment, but like the access to information used to be, kind of kept behind the agent's, gates, or the appraiser used to be a source of data. And now the data's out there, and it's more, what do you do with it and how do you interpret it, than, how do you even get access to it in the first place?
Yeah, that's right. I don't remember if it was like a Dale Carnegie or Zig Ziglar type and it might not even be either of those guys that is saying, something like, quoted as saying, 80% of what we worry about never happens. And I find myself, I look at appraisal waivers in this discussion and probably give a little more leeway to the decisions under like in a risk assessment that the GSEs are putting together. In large part, I assess my ability to influence, which in this case is not super high, and against how I need to respond to this. And, so I think that assessment is largely, look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on whether this should or should not happen. I think it's important to understand it, and we've spent a lot of time doing that. But if it's a reality, how do I accept this change as an opportunity instead of focused on the natural first instinct of that my opportunity is shrinking?
Boy, absolutely. And your comment about worrying about 80% of things that never happen reminds me of a recent interview that we just that just came out with Jeff Bezos, where he was talking about the very same concept of risk is probably overstated in our minds. And of course, that's easy for, someone who's wildly successful, to come out and say. But, as I think about this concept of adaptation and even just assessing risk, Amazon started out selling books online in the 90s, and has evolved into this thing that is not an online bookstore anymore. And as you listen, or at least as I've listened to some of Jeff's perspective on what he wanted to do, he saw the internet as an emerging trend, a wave he wanted to try to figure out how to ride. And he didn't know where it was going to end up ultimately, but he just said, I'm going to start somewhere, and I'm going to start selling books online and then see where it evolves. And today, Amazon, touches almost, if not everybody, almost everybody's lives in different ways, from what I watch on a streaming service to the way I receive, all sorts of packages, not just books. I mean, books are probably, one of the fewest things that get delivered in the mail, or delivered by Amazon at this point. But to AWS, from online cloud compute, services, that they've evolved dramatically, and all with the desire of riding this internet wave. And it just makes me look at and say, well, man, we're in the early days of an artificial intelligence wave, and where does that lead? Just really interesting. As a side note, Bezos is now focusing on artificial intelligence and wanting to ride that next wave, and will probably do so successfully. But just interesting to see a case study of somebody who's looked at change and an evolution on early days of the internet as an opportunity, as opposed to something to be, fearful of or try to resist.
Boy, I think he has really, I think he has been sort of the originator. What a fascinating individual that we don't know enough about. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, and boy, I have stumbled into a couple over the last 12 months. And if any of you haven't listened to those, just so obviously intelligent, and I forget what the description of him was, but just really, really wise, and so everything just resonates on a deep degree. But he was, I think, kind of the author of the mentality of keeping that founder and startup mentality all the way through, and this has been evident in all of the things that they're doing, and I think very much something that real estate professionals can emulate and try and look at it this way, because you can't ever get settled. And I think all of us, that our first instinct when we see the pie shrinking of the revenue, the appraisal revenue that we've had available over the last 20 years shrinking a bit, well, that's what I've been doing, and I expect that to be working in the future. And so we have a negative reaction. But if we have this startup mentality, we can immediately start to see that as opportunity. And with Bezos, he described, I think, being in a brewery in Belgium or something when he had the concept of AWS, which of course is what Amazon becoming the home delivery service then became, which is now much more profitable than home delivery. It is this cloud compute, cloud server stuff. And he looked at the brewery back then. I guess the brewery's been around a long time, and it had its own electrical conductor or engine used to brew the beer, from the early 1800s or whenever it was, before kind of wired electricity, and infrastructure all around. And so they've still kept this. And so he got to see what it was originally like, and then observed, oh, this is how everybody had it that needed energy right there, electricity. You had to generate it yourself, control it, build it, maintain it, all of that, until we got this wired infrastructure, and you could outsource that to an electrical grid and so on and so forth off site. And said, well, that's what's going to happen with servers. When you and I started in this, Jeff, I actually still have some of these, sadly, but servers in a server room that kind of gets too hot, we maintain them, we buy them, we replace them. All of those things is now, AWS has put all of that into the cloud and wired it. And so really fascinating to kind of see that, and is really describing artificial intelligence as that same sort of thing as he dives in. I think you've heard that same sort of interview. Do you want to describe how his vision on that?
Well, yeah. And I struggle to not just feel really crappy about myself listening to people like, Jeff, because it's like, dude, how do you see the world the way that you do? And I think you spoke to this level of wisdom and stuff, but yeah, I mean, to that point, Mark, he's describing and saying that artificial intelligence is much more like electricity than it is like the internet wave, in that it's going to be a horizontal enabler. It's going to be everywhere and in everything, and going to facilitate a whole lot of new innovations and productivity gains and efficiency gains. And, I don't remember if he opined on this, but a couple of business leaders, I talked about NVIDIA's CEO talking about, headcount's going to grow a little bit, but productivity is going to grow dramatically more. And another CEO that I recently listened to is a very similar concept. I would blank on who it was in the moment, but this aspect or this concept that just like electricity is in everything that we do. I mean, electricity is facilitating this conversation with us. When you think about it from a like basic principles perspective, I think artificial intelligence is going to be that. And, we had a fun conversation with Jim Amron about, artificial intelligence in appraising. I think it finds its way into everything and improves the quality of life generally. But that will come with, with adaptations, with irrelevance of certain things and like new opportunities that don't even exist yet on the horizon. But I look forward to what the future brings. I don't know that everything out there is going to work out well, but and maybe these waivers ultimately are a ticking time bomb. I don't see that necessarily being the case, but just like all of these things we're talking about, you don't know where it's going to go, and there will be failures and issues and problems along the way. But at the end of the day, I look forward to the journey. It's exciting to be in this phase in time for sure.
Amen. Jeff, I think you and I end up sort of spending our time on the same corners of the internet. First of all, on the list of the world's smartest Jeffs, I'm not sure that you are at the very top. I think Bezos may take that cake. So not to burst your bubble.
He's got a jump start on me, man. I got 10 years to catch up to him, I think.
Yeah, you're not done. You're not done. But I think the CEO you might have been maybe was referencing was Satya Nadella from Microsoft, who obviously owns a SaaS company and certainly has made a bet on large language models with OpenAI. But he was among the voices even in this last week that are saying that, look, once you provide agency to these large language models, meaning the language model can decide that something could be done to solve the problem. So you add agency, meaning you can then go be an agent. The language model can be an agent to go execute. That it's the end of SaaS, software as a service, and like Microsoft Office is SaaS, just as an example. And I think it's going to take a long time to get there, and will impact people very differently. But a really good example of how AI is going to be in every aspect of what we do.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Unfortunately, I'm not even the smartest one on this podcast in the moment. You're right. That is who I was thinking of now that you jog my memory on it. But they're looking at ways to disrupt their own core business because they see it coming anyway. And to me, that just feels like the right approach is what's coming down the pipeline and how do I adapt to it. That's not an easy thing, not a comfortable place to be, but it feels like the way to thrive in this.
Well, Jeff, I'll close this change discussion with maybe an optimistic view of what's going on here, and maybe a struggle that we've all had operating in the valuation space. We are in a space that doesn't allow people to change and innovate very much. We have a very, very risk averse stakeholder base all the way across, and for good reason. And so there's a lot of change that is being introduced to us on every different level. PRIA is one of those. The new UAD forms is one of those. Appraisal waivers is one of those. Hybrids and property data collectors are other examples. But there is a thread among all of this that I think is important for appraisers to identify, and it is creating and allowing more flexibility in the process than has existed before. We are in a very rigid process, and if I take a look, and I have, at the certifications on the new form, far less restrictive than the old certifications on the existing 1004. Hybrids allow appraisers and all to go about what they do very, very differently and much more creatively than how it's been done before. It is a challenge for appraisers to deliver quality product in these new environments, but that's always a challenge in those. But so I think the stakeholders that we criticize quite a bit, and rightfully so in many areas, are really adjusting the landscape and the rules of the game that we play to help us be more creative and adapt to the changing marketplace.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's not been the case. There hasn't been this level of, they term it appraisal modernization. And I know there are a lot of appraisers that are not excited, about that, which, I mean, it's all part of assessing the landscape and deciding what you will or won't do. I think as things go forward, Mark, you'll see that mortgage appraisal increasingly may look different from non-mortgage, type of appraisal assignments. And I'm okay with that. I mean, you got to do what you need to do to be, successful there. But it is all part of this, this moving forward, in the landscape. And my hope is that that's a positive direction that goes well, that appraisers can, perform competently and well. It sure seems that having an evaluation expert in these transactions is in the benefit of the market participants, the buyers who certainly aren't, valuation experts, and even the agents that are good and deal in pricing frequently, oftentimes will reach out or benefit from that, unique perspective that an appraiser evaluation professional can bring to the table. And I think there's opportunity to be had for sure.
Episode 23 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, enjoyed the conversation here as always. Really looking forward to, I think we'll get another episode in before the end of the year, but looking forward to where we can take this and more engaging kind of curiosities and all through 2025.
I totally agree, Mark. Definitely appreciate the kind words of encouragement people have given out there. So enjoy the conversation, and we'll close out the year with a final episode.
All righty. Have a great weekend.
Hey, thanks. Take care.